Okay, a couple of things. So the midterm that you took in class, a number of people came to see me in office hours on Thursday. But if you do have questions about things, especially for the places where you typed in answers, if you thought you entered, if you thought basically what you entered was supposed to be correct, just come by and see me in my office. I actually have office hours right after class, so you can just follow me over or whatever. And I see most of you submitted the take-home part, so we'll get Srija on that in terms of grading that. So we'll see. So basically, the weighting is essentially 50-50, right? So 50% for the in-class part and 50% for the take-home part. All right. Looking at the in-class part, grades actually were fairly good. I believe the average was in the upper 70s, so that's a high C. And yeah, so overall people did pretty well. Yeah. I'm sorry, say that again? Oh, for the take-home exam, yeah. If you worked for the take-home part, if you worked in a group, as long as you're signed up with that person in a group, only one of you needed to submit.
Usually we turn in, it notifies both people, but this time doesn't do that. So I'm not sure what's up.
I don't know. We'll take a look. I mean, if there's an issue, you can let me know. All right. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, on grade. Is there an update on the grade for Bootstrap?
Update on the grade for.
Yeah, that hasn't been graded.
I think that it has. I'll double check why you're not seeing that. And yeah, that does remind me, I'm hoping to, if not this week, then next week we'll have up sort of the assignments for everybody to kind of do their voting on selecting the best and all of that, for the extra credit part. Okay. Other. Okay, so today we're going to cover, well, I hope to cover, we're going to cover two totally unrelated technologies. We're going to talk a little bit about jQuery. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it. I'll show you a couple of uses of it, and then we're going to dive headfirst into Ruby. So yeah, there's that stuff. Okay. So I have on our page, I have this starter file here. So if you're interested in kind of following along, you can certainly grab that and do this. Let me just create a folder here. And let's grab that file. And we'll open that up in brackets. Okay. So here's this starter file. Basically, if you haven't seen it, there it is. Okay, so basically it simply displays a whole bunch of checkboxes, and we have this kind of this which you'll see fairly frequently with web systems. Typically, when you have a number of checkboxes, and you can select all of them or deselect all of them, etc. Right now, you'll notice it does neither. Right, it is broken. Okay, so if we take a look at the code, basically all that we have here is simply the raw HTML for displaying this stuff, right? So I created the starter file just so we don't have to waste time with you watching me type all this crap. But a couple of points to note about this. Okay, so. In terms of the checkboxes, right? So you'll notice basically each checkbox is an input with type checkbox set. Okay, typically we'll give it a name for to sort of group these things. So you notice each of these has the name month. Each of them has a particular value that is stored, and I have individual IDs set on each of them. Now, part of the reason for that, the weird usability issue in terms of the checkbox is that it has no text that the user views associated with it. Okay? So it's kind of a weird thing. It's like, I mean, you have a checkbox, but there's nothing that says what this checkbox is for and all of that. That's how they built HTML. Anyways, what the sort of preferred method these days is to use the semantic tag label, and when you specify a label, you use the for attribute, and the for attribute takes an ID. Okay, so that's why each one of these has a separate, unique ID, so that essentially we have nice semantic HTML here that says, oh, okay, here's the actual label, which is just plain text for that thing, etc. Right, and so you can see for all 12 of the months, there they are. Okay, so nothing too earth-shattering here. Additionally, I kind of have this little the input for our check all button, and you'll notice I have that surrounded in a span. Basically, the span is just there so that I can sort of have a hook for grabbing both of those things together to change the background. Okay, so that's all that's going on with that. Okay, hopefully that much should be fairly self-explanatory and so forth. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to basically build the check all options first with plain old JavaScript. Then we're going to do the same thing using jQuery to kind of see how that changes what we do and so forth. Okay, so let me go ahead here. I'm just going to save. I'll do a save as. Actually, I'll do it this way. So copy paste and do a rename here and just call this -js. All right, and then let's open this particular one. There we are. Okay, so it's Check'em JS version. Okay. All right, so let's add a script in here for dealing with this. So despite the defer, I actually was seeing when I was kind of playing around with this, you can still get into a situation where the script will actually run before the page loads and the DOM is sort of ready to attach listeners and so forth. So we should probably talk about kind of ways of waiting for that. So in plain old JavaScript, one way of doing that, we can add our event listener. Oops, event listener. And there are a number of different events, but actually if you sort of dig through the MDN's, Mozilla's documentation, the sort of one that most people actually want, although a lot of developers don't use, they sort of wait for the page to load, when in fact really what they want is this one, DOM content loaded. Okay, so the DOM stands for the document object model. Basically, it's what JavaScript kind of sees as the page. It's sort of the representation of the page. Depending on what your background is, if you've taken classes where you've talked about abstract syntax trees and these kinds. Essentially, it's this type of data structure. Okay, so once the DOM content is loaded, basically it's been parsed. It essentially is understood by the browser. Now we're essentially ready to execute code on that. Okay, and so this is one way of doing that. So again, just like with add event listener in the past, we're going to pass in an anonymous function. Okay, so here's our little anonymous function here, and basically this is going to have our code for kind of setting everything up and so forth. All right, so let's just double check that actually works, right? So we can say, okay, the DOM has been loaded. Make sure that this is actually getting called, that it's Monday morning, that I didn't actually mistype this and so forth. Let's see, I think I have, I'm not sure which one this is, let me double check. All right, run this again. and we'll go to inspect, and we'll go to console, and yeah, sure enough, there it is, okay? So we see that, that the DOM loaded message is in fact printed, so yeah, our function is getting called. All right, so what we need to do basically is get a handle to this checkbox here so that we can add a listener to it, okay? And again, the markup is already set up for us, right? So here is our here is the checkbox itself. Notice it already has an ID set on that particular element, right? So it's the checkem ID. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a variable here called checkbox. Oops, sorry. Okay. Yes. And then do our document get element by ID, right? And then the ID, which is checkem, like so. Okay, so now we have a handle to that, and you know, again, especially when you're kind of new to these things, it's not a bad idea to kind of test as you go, right? So, okay, I already know that this function's being called. Now let's see that we actually get the handle to the checkbox, right? So I just come over here. Let me go ahead and do a reload. Yeah, I get it. Okay, so no big deal there. Okay, so we have a handle to our checkbox. Let's add a listener to it. Add event listener. The particular event that we want for the checkbox is the change event. So we can do that, and then once again, set up a nice little function for this. So it does in fact get a parameter, namely the event. And again, let's just make sure that we got everything set up. Okay, changed. All right, so yes. And notice, of course, when we unselect it, it also invokes change. Okay, so far so good. Everybody's asleep. I'm with you. All right. Okay. So we've hooked up our event listener that basically that will get called automatically now when that checkbox is checked and so forth. Now we need to kind of go through the rest of the stuff. Okay, so basically, what do we need to do? Okay, essentially what we need to do is we're going to need to grab all the other checkboxes. Okay, so we need some collection of those. There's a bunch of different ways that we can do this. Here's what I'm going to point out to you. Okay, so if we take a look at our checkboxes, our individual checkboxes, they all have the name month, right? So notice, name equals month, name equals month, name equals month, etc. Right? And this is fairly common, especially for a form where we have related checkboxes. You'll see this type of thing. If I wasn't doing something like that, then maybe I would actually use a class to identify these, etc. But that name equals month is going to be enough for us to get the hook that we need. The reason being that the reason being that we can call get element by name. Get elements, plural, by name. Okay. So, and as the name of the method suggests, right, we expect, unlike, for instance, something like getting by ID, IDs are supposed to be unique, getting by name, it's entirely possible that, that multiple elements may in fact share the same name. Okay, so what's the name? We already saw it's month. Okay, and again, we can just store this in a variable, right? So I'll call this the month checks. And I have 2 dots there, which I don't want. And that. And again, I mean, if, you know, we can certainly. Oh, Consolio. All right. There's a. CKS, thank you. Well, I'll do it this way. I'll change one of them. All right, let's see. Nope, still. Yep. There we are. Okay, and yeah, there they all are. Woohoo. Okay, so we have an array of things. Okay, and we want to apply some operation across all of the elements in that array. Okay. Should sound familiar, right? So what do we want to do? Reduce? No. You're right. So we could actually use map. Although actually in this case, using map is kind of an abuse of using map here. And here's why. Okay? So remember the way that map works. Map works by applying some operation to every element in the array and generating basically a new array for us. Okay? So the idea is we're sort of taking the current array and creating a brand new array that is the result of applying this operation across all of those things. In this case, I actually don't want a new array. Really what I want is the more imperative style of apply this operation that's going to change the states of things to this array of elements. Okay. So while I could kind of shoehorn map into this, it's really not the best fit. So realistically, here a for each loop is actually probably a better choice. All right, so month checks dot for each, and so I can just do something like CD. Okay. So now. Okay. What we basically do is we need to change the state of each one of the checkboxes, right? So for each checkbox, there is the checked property, and we need to set that. Now, I could certainly do something like this. I could just say, oh, okay, set it equal to true. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, they all get checked. But then when I do this, so I could create another event listener that kind of tries to compete with this one, maybe create another button, etc. That's too much work for a Monday morning. So what we can do instead is have our one button basically be a check all or a clear all. That is that really what I'm going to do is I want to set the checked of each one of the month check boxes to whatever the state of the check'em box is, right? And notice we have our variable here for that. Save that, make sure it's loaded up. Okay, so that checks all of them. Click it again. We. Okay. Now, we probably should, we could also actually change the text there. Let's go ahead and do that. And I could probably get rid of this printing that out every time because I don't need to anymore. Okay. So a couple of things. First of all, notice, so in here, okay, basically right inside here, this whole thing is what? It's a function. It's an anonymous function, right? Here we are referring to the checkbox variable. Where is the checkbox variable declared? Right? The bottom line is it's not declared inside this function. It's not one of the parameters. It's not declared in here. Okay? That means formally, programming language theorists would refer to this as an open or an unbound reference, right? The actual declaration is there, outside the function that uses it. And so our anonymous function closes over that particular variable. We're using a closure, right? People make a whole lot of noise about closures, and that's all it is. Okay? No big deal. Okay, so let's actually change the text. So I can already get the I already have a reference to the checkbox itself. What I'm going to do is I'll also create a checkbox label. Variable element by ID, and let's see, what's the ID of the label? The label doesn't have an ID. Fine, let's add one. Okay, so I'll just call it checkem label. There it is. All right, so we can so we now have a variable that holds on to the checkem label. Incidentally, so I mean, there's a couple of things. One is, you notice that line 17 is outside the actual handler for clicking and so forth, right? Could I actually move that inside add event listener? Yeah, absolutely, you could. One good reason for not doing it, every lookup takes time. Now, we talked about this before. Looking up by IDs are the fastest thing that you can do in terms of lookups in JavaScript. Okay. Things like the get elements by name, that's slow. Okay. But looking up by IDs is pretty fast. But nevertheless, if I have a fairly complicated page, etc., and there's lots of events happening, every single time I'm taking that hit of going and having to do the lookup, right? Here, on the other hand, I don't actually have to do the lookup each and every time because I've done it once and essentially have closed over that variable. So yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
Can we add them like as a child of the checkbox? Like, can we look through like the children of it and like make it check? Is that faster or faster?
No, I mean the thing is, honestly, a lot of these methods of document get by kinds of things, you will get various performance hits on some of those. You'll even see people who will do things like, when they're writing a for loop in JavaScript, instead of saying, instead of in the condition having, loop variable less than array.length, whatever the array is .length, they'll actually store that as a separate variable and shove it in, and then use the variable there. Again, because some performance issues and some things like that, right? If you're really trying to squeeze every ounce of speed out and all that. It's kind of interesting because, while we talk about that, again, the JavaScript implementations have gotten very, very, very fast. In fact, anybody heard of React? Okay, so React is a JavaScript framework for doing sort of responsive web systems. Was actually created by Facebook. What they do is the following heresy. Facebook decided that instead of doing this stuff like, oh, go and look up a particular element and now change its property to checked and so forth, they said, look, whenever an update happens, rebuild the entire page. Throw out the whole page and just rebuild it. Oh. And in fact, a lot of people in the web development world went, that's insane, that's crazy, right? And then they went, yeah, but see, we got the performance numbers that show that it works just fine. Son of a. So like React now is like one of the hot frameworks because they're like, oh, you couldn't really do that. So yeah, I mean, you always have to be careful when you're talking about when you're talking to the performance weasels. When they're talking about oh, we got to do this kind of thing to squeeze every little ounce out. Again, got to be careful about that. But anyways, all right. So what I'm going to do is the checkbox underscore label. I'm going to use the inner HTML property. And I'm just going to set it like such. Okay, so essentially what this is going to do, it's going to allow me to change the check all to whatever it is that I want. Okay, and so I'm going to do it like this. So I'll say, okay, checkbox. Is the checkbox checked? Okay, if it is, then my text should now read clear all, and otherwise it will read check all. How many people have seen this question mark colon operator in various languages? Right? C has it. It's a little controversial. This is a ternary operator. So ternary basically meaning 3. Most operators that we typically deal with are binary. Think of adding numbers. Think of comparing things. Think of equality. Of course, we do have unary negation, not or a negative sign on a number. Right? This is a ternary operator. So it takes 3 things. And it is a ternary conditional operator. Okay? So what this says, as I said, if this thing before the question mark is true, then the entire expression, that whole thing, evaluates to what is between the question mark and the colon. That. Otherwise, the whole thing evaluates to what follows the colon. That. Okay. So that's the conditional operator. Okay, so let's see if that's working. All right, so I click this. Nope, screwed something up. Let's see. Is this actually live? It's interesting. It's not complaining. What would we do? I didn't save it, you're right. I thought I had saved it. There it is. Yep. Yay. Okay. So, that's one way of doing this using plain old JavaScript. Okay. Now, I mentioned before, if you look at web development job ads, almost invariably, upwards of probably 90% of them will specifically list jQuery as one of the things that you should know for for applying for such a job. And jQuery is one of the most popular JavaScript libraries around in terms of usage and so forth. So for the most part, you can safely assume that, yeah, it's going to be there, or you're going to end up being able to use it and so forth. And part of the reason is it just adds in a whole lot of additional niceties to things. One, if you are doing any serious JavaScript, you invariably will run into weird browser differences. For instance, you notice that I used innerHTML here. There's actually another property you can use, something called innerText. Okay? Now, what's the difference between innerText and innerHTML? InnerText was added by the good folks at Microsoft, because they just like to just add random crap to standards and so forth and do their own thing. Thanks, Microsoft. So you have weird things like that, where one particular browser manufacturer decides to sort of change the standard and so forth. Maybe it's the case that you need to support a very old version of a browser, right? Old versions of Internet Explorer, etc. And so you end up with all these sort of weird edge cases that you end up having to deal with. The nice thing about libraries like JavaScript, jQuery, is they've basically been coded by the real hardcore JavaScript nerds to deal with all of those cases. So they've done the hard, nasty work for you. Okay. All right, let's take a look at some of this stuff. So let me go ahead again. Go back to here, and we'll create another version of this. Let's do it with this one. I'll do it with that one. Kind of start fresh. All right, so we'll have our jQuery one. There we are. All right, so jQuery. First thing we want to do is load up jQuery. And so we can only go to, I could actually download it. I'm gonna load it off of the CDN directly. Typically, when you're doing development, it's not a bad idea to have your own copy. Then when you decide to push out to production, you can use the CDN. I'm feeling brave today. I don't know why. So let's do that. So I've copied that particular script tag, and there it is. We added in to load that up. All right. So now that we have jQuery, let's take a look at doing kind of the same types of things, right? So you'll recall, basically one of the first things we did is kind of wait for the page to be essentially ready for us to add content. Okay, so how do we do that in the jQuery world? Well, it looks a little different. Okay, so the first thing is jQuery gives you two global objects. Okay, one named cryptically enough jQuery. Right? So the jQuery object has a number of methods that basically implement essentially the jQuery library. The thing is, if you use the jQuery object, the rest of the web developers will point and laugh. What most web developers do is they use this one, which is just another variable for jQuery. So $, basically is also the jQuery object. And the idea is first we're going to do some sort of selection. So that is we're calling the main function of jQuery for selecting an item. And in this case I just want the document itself. Okay? But what we want to do is jQuery gives us this handy method, the ready method. And the idea of using the ready method is that you pass along a function, a callback, that gets called when basically the document is ready. Okay. Here I actually am going to leave in. I'm going to leave in this defer. That's not going to so much help me make sure that the script definitely executes at the end of the body. But what it does do is it's going to make sure that that we're waiting for the we give the jQuery library time to load. Okay, and that's basically
Is defer one of those cross-browser weirdnesses, or is it just broken?
Nope, it's part of HTML5, right? So with the script tag, you can use defer. You can also the other one. In fact, I should probably put that in here. Is async, right? So the JavaScript library, the jQuery library now essentially will be loaded. And what we're saying with async is, yeah, we're going to load that as the page is loading. The defer here basically says, oh, you know what? There's probably something else we want to load, namely jQuery, before we actually do this. So, yeah. Okay, so the ready function, and again, I'm just going to use the that nice little syntax for the ES6 syntax for an anonymous function, and then once again, let's just make sure that this is actually called. So we're ready. Okay, good. And let's go over and run this. And let's check. Whoop, and I screwed something up. Yep, I did. Right there. What? We're going to do this now. $sign is not defined. Yes, we are loading jQuery. What if I take out async? Will that help it? Or is it still going to be?
Leave it in bracket.
Yep. There we are. Save. Good. Okay. Yes, there we go. Yeah, it didn't like async. All right. So, we're ready. Okay. So, let's go through the rest of the stuff. So, selectors, so the jQuery API basically is made up of a couple of things. There's AJAX, we're going to talk about that today. There are a bunch of things for dealing with you see, attributes and so forth, effects, events, manipulation, and finally, there's traversal, etc. This is sort of the big one, selectors. jQuery basically gives you CSS selectors on steroids. Okay, so everything that is a valid CSS selector will automatically play with jQuery. But it gives you additional types of selection and so forth as well. And so you can kind of see there's various attribute. So all these manner of attribute type selectors. The attribute contains prefix. The attribute contains and so on. So there's all those, right? Whether something is a checkbox. Child selectors, so on and so forth, right? So there's a whole lot of stuff here that basically it just kind of adds on for you, kind of making your life easier. All right, so as I said, we can use plain old CSS style selectors. I already have an ID for my checkbox. I'm going to use that, right? There's no reason to not use it. Again, selecting by IDs is the fastest thing we can do. And here, notice, the syntax is exactly the syntax that one uses for CSS, right? So if I wanted in CSS to refer to ID checkem, I would use the # there, right? Same thing here. Then, there's the change method. Incidentally, the change method is a sort of alias for the on method, which is the more generic version. It's basically the add event listener version within jQuery. This just kind of calls that automatically, passing in change as the particular event. Here's where it gets interesting. So, once again, I'm going to select all of those things that have the name month. So I'm going to use an attribute selector, name equal month. And that returns a collection. Now watch. So first of all, the event that we get from jQuery, it has a target, and basically that's going to be that checkbox that we've attached, namely check 'em. And then notice, I'm saying set the property of what? This collection? To that. Oh, not page source. No loop. That's totally worth the price. Which is free, by the way. I'd pay money for that. So, even when we get back a collection, what we can do is automatically do this change, right? So here I'm saying, oh, okay, set the property not on the collection. What it's actually doing is it's looping through every element in that collection saying, set your check property to this, set your check property to this, etc., giving us that behavior. Pretty cool. This is where it really starts to pay off. Let's do the label part. So I'll do that. Notice this time I don't actually have an ID for that. I just want to show you sort of another little thing we can do with jQuery here. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to look for check 'em again, and oops. Right, and so taking a look, right, so here is check 'em itself, and then right after the check 'em tag is the label. Okay, so all I have to do is call the next method, which allows me to traverse the DOM, go to the next, basically go to our sibling, and then again innerHTML equals, okay, and we'll do our select on check 'em, and if its checked field is true, then we set this to clear all, and otherwise we set this to check all. Save it. Check 'em next. Is saved. is that not working now? Let me just see. Shouldn't be, but let's see. Oh, it's not even hooked up directly. All right, I'll check that more later because I don't want to bog down. Okay, so that's one example within jQuery. Let's look at another thing. As I mentioned, jQuery has some helpers for something called AJAX. How many people have heard of AJAX? Not the cleaner. Not from Deadpool either. Okay. So what is AJAX? It's actually an acronym. They should actually have that capitalized. What is it?
Asynchronous JavaScript and XML?
Yeah, right. So AJAX stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It's a horrible name for a really awesome technology. Also, you should note that the XML part is totally optional. And these days, usually isn't. So, we've seen before, the basic working of a browser is a request comes in from the client for a particular resource. Could be a page, could be media requests, etc. And then the browser basically renders that page. Now, when you click a hyperlink, typically then what would happen is it makes another request for another page. So get this page, get that page, etc. Bigger pages, mean longer loading times, right? And every time we're sort of loading up an entire page. Now again, people concerned about efficiency said, why should we have to always do a page load? And that's where AJAX comes in. So AJAX allows you, from JavaScript, to make a request back to the server for, anything. Originally, the idea was it sent XML, structured data. These days, as I said, you can get XML, but you could also, it's probably more likely, and especially from JavaScript, easier if you decide to use JSON, JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. Okay, JavaScript Object Notation is the hot, sexy to XML's fat best friend. Okay, that's kind of XML's big and bloated and all that. JSON streamlined. Okay. Or any other kind of markup language, etc. Or plain text files, or partial HTML, etc., etc., etc. And so it just asks for that bit of data, and then can do, whatever it needs to do on the page. So places that we first started to see this were, for instance, type ahead search functionality, right? So as you're typing into a web form, you start you type in a couple of characters, and you see it sort of populating with, okay, basically, typically was done with a JSON request. Okay. You can do this also for instance, going back to dealing with chart data, you could actually request the raw data itself from the server, separate from the web page. So there are a number of ways that, that this can be used, all right? So let's take a look at doing some of this. And actually, I'm going to switch over to Webstorm. The reason is that once we start talking about things like JSON, we actually have to have a server sort of hosting our code. Okay, so I'll create a new project and just call this AJAX. All right. And so we'll create a couple of things. So I'll create a file called ajax.html. Can you guys see that over there? I didn't need to make it. Let me do a couple of things. Dim the lights. Yeah, that's very. The dark background's actually great for easing on the eyes, but it sucks for presentations. All right. Okay. So, taking a look at some AJAX, right? All right. Is that big enough? Stunned silence. All right. So once again, I'm going to use JavaScript for this. You can do AJAX from plain old JavaScript. I'm not going to do that. I'll show you. I'll show it to you in jQuery. Just makes life easier and so forth. All right. So let me go back. Let's see. Where is? Oh, I can grab it from here. Okay, so once again, let me grab the tag for loading up jQuery, and we'll put that in the head of our document. Okay, don't really need that open. So, a script. And so once again, we'll do our document ready. Oops. Document dot ready. So we'll need a couple of things. So one, what I'm going to do is, right, so I'll just have I'll have a little note here, something like this, okay? The following is not actually in the HTML page. And I'll create a UL with an ID. Let's just call it data list. So that'll be able to have a handle to that. Okay. All right. $.get. And that takes, first of all, the name of basically the URL that you want to access from AJAX. So for instance, I could just have something like data.text. Now, originally, what would happen is basically you'd have a function that was another argument to this, and you could actually still do that. I'll show you why I don't want to do that. But basically, I could do this, and just for right now, let's say. Right, there's the data. Okay, so now that we have that, let me go ahead and run this. Browser's blinking. Okay, and notice, I mean, we don't actually have anything specifically. Oop, no, I didn't want that. But I do see that error, right? So it says, failed to load the resource, basically data.txt. Yeah, because I never created the file. Okay, so then we got to figure out, okay, how are we actually going to handle the error, and so forth. And in older versions of jQuery, there was kind of some additional functions and stuff that you could deal with. Those are basically deprecated. These days, they go with a promises style handling of all of this, which basically looks like the following. So the only parameter that I send to get is basically the URL that I want to access, namely data.txt. Then I'm going to call, for instance, the done function, and the done function is basically going to take my callback. Okay. Now, right there, that doesn't actually solve our problem. Again, if I come back over to here, oop, not there. Where was it? Did I close it? Maybe I did. So if I come back over here, yeah, it's still complaining about the fact that it didn't find it. But what using the promises version basically gives me is this. In addition to using done, and let me there it is. There's also the fail method. And so fail, again, takes a callback that will get called in the event that our AJAX request has failed. What's that? Line 16. No, I don't want a semicolon, right? So this is literally chaining these together. So it's .get, .done, and then I also have .fail. Yeah. All right, so now, yeah, there we are. We get our actual little error displayed right there. Okay, now let's generate some data. Okay, so I'm just going to come over to the project, and I'll come here and say create a file called data.txt, right? And then I don't know, fee, fi, fo, fum. And let's just run this, see what we, right? So notice we don't get our error. And yeah, I am actually seeing because I'm logging the data itself, right? So there we see displayed v505. Okay. Now, a couple of points about this, right? The A in AJAX stands for asynchronous. That is, that basically what that should tell you, what do you think it means? Nobody's heard the word asynchronous. Yeah, we've heard it, we just don't understand it. Yeah, I know.
Live, like a live preview in the editor.
Like a live preview in the editor?
Yeah.
Right, so typically asynchronous is used when we talk about threaded programming. Running something on a separate thread of execution. In fact, part of the reason why we need to pass a callback to the, for instance, ready function or the fail function is that basically we make the request to the server. Now, we could be on We could be on our cell phone out in the middle of Everglades, and so we have 1 bar worth of service, and that data is just trickling in. On top of that, we're accessing a server that is heavily under load, and so it's having trouble serving our request. But then eventually, we get the data, or everything times out, and one of our functions gets called. Okay. That's kind of what AJAX does, both using JavaScript and the using jQuery and using the underlying JavaScript. Except for one thing. JavaScript isn't multi-threaded. Ever. In JavaScript, there's only ever 1 thread of execution. But nevertheless, using AJAX, we'll use time sharing essentially to allow that to happen, to basically make it feel responsive. Okay. So even though we talk about it as asynchronous, JavaScript is always single-threaded. JavaScript is single-threaded. There aren't multiple threads. So again, we use time sharing. Okay, let's actually put that stuff on the page. So now that I have those things, okay, what I'm going to do, no, not that one. What I'm going to do is over here. Okay, so I'm going to take my data and I'm going to split it, right, just like we did with the assignment, right? So we'll split it basically on the new lines. Okay. Then I'm going to do a for each on that, and so we'll say, okay, for every one of the strings, we will do the following. Make sure we have our semicolon. And so now what I'll say is, I'm actually going to use this, which this is going to look weird, okay? So it initially, especially when you're first looking at jQuery, this typically when you have $ open paren, you're saying, look for the following thing. But here's what I'm going to actually put in there. Oops, yeah, that's great. Where the hell's the insert that I hit? There it is. All right. Li plus S Anybody see any LIs on the page? No, we ain't got none. Because what I'm going to do actually is call the append to method. And here is where we pass along what it is that we're searching for. So this says find the data list, find the item that has ID data list, and basically add in this HTML. And now I have that. And one extra. Right, so let's get rid of the one extra. So a couple of things, let me go ahead, I'll inspect this. First of all, notice, I have fee and then a new line and that. Why? Because when we split, we still have the new lines in the string. Okay. All right, we can fix that. That's a proper map. Actually, I can even put this kind of, do it this way. And again, let me just inspect that. Yeah, now my HTML is tidier. I still got this extra one though, right? So that's fine. I can throw out empty lines. And there it is. So we've dynamically generated those list items from an AJAX call. Okay. Questions, issues, etc. So in the 8 minutes remaining, I'm not going to start Ruby on you. That would really be too much. However, so I will just point out, let's see. So I have links here for the Ruby homepage and all of that. Okay, so a couple of things. Windows has always been kind of a second-class citizen in terms of Ruby. Okay, so if you do have a Windows machine, like I do, basically to download it, you're going to want to go here to Ruby installer for Windows. Okay, so you'll want to you'll go there. Yeah, that's great. Okay, whatever. There we are. Okay, and then you can go to download, and then it'll give you a whole bunch of different options. Okay, most of the time, typically, especially on a 64-bit system, you will choose the 64-bit version of whatever you're interested in. Except we will not do that. The reason why? Because actually the 64-bit version is new-ish, and there's still a lot of Ruby libraries that don't play with 64-bit code. So get the 32-bit version. Okay, so we'll be using Ruby 2.3.1, this one here. Okay. Additionally, there is Ruby has some nice documentation for it, a nice system built in, and so forth. So for it, just to give you kind of a quick idea, there's a command line tool that'll let you sort of look up anything in Ruby. So for instance, there's everything it knows about the array class. So that's really cool. To get that to work kind of sucks. For a couple of reasons. Actually, the main reason has to do with how Ruby installs any kind of add-ons. Okay, so Ruby uses a package management system called gem. When you want to install Ruby packages, you run the gem command. So gem will contact various servers online to try to download things and so forth. Because, of course, we're all security conscious these days, generally when you're downloading code libraries from the interwebs, you probably want to use HTTPS. Why? Because otherwise a man in the middle could basically inject their own kinds of stuff. So that's what Ruby does. And the SSL certificates that they were using was sort of an older version of encryption that has been shown to have certain flaws. And so what that means is even though you download the latest version of the Ruby installer, Gem's not going to work out of the box. Okay, so all you have to do, and I have the whole write-up here, basically download this zip file. It has 3 files, PEM files. You're going to go to the one directory and copy those files into that directory, and then Gem should be happy for you. Okay, so if you want to, again, if you want to sort of then be ready to follow along in next class, you can start working on that. RubyMine, that's also by IntelliJ. It's basically their version of a Ruby IDE. It's really cool. That's what we're going to use, and I will see you next time. What's that?
Figure out like there's some bars would round and then also and it like here, I can actually show you just the so here it's like these are right, but then I come here and then it's 30. It means
Oh, well, it probably is rounding then. It's probably rounding. Well, yes, but, well, actually, no, that's right, because it rounded to 5.8. Then why would it take away the .1? Great.
well, one of the things is here it says 18, and that value is like 17.6.
Well, 17.6 rounds to 18.
Right.
But then the question is why the other one doesn't.
Right. Why the 5.8?
Let me double check mine, but yeah, I mean, don't worry about it, I didn't expect it. Yes.
Exam. Mark up on this.
Right, come by my office hours and I'll fix it.
Okay.
Where's the office again?
Engineering B, 343C.
Are you gonna go there now?
I'm going there, yep, right after.